If COVID-19 became a pandemic in 1990 rather than 2020, how would events have played out differently? Every box of cereal would have a limited edition collectible mystery mask in it that you have to submerge in water for an hour to activate the filter or some speep. Hypercolor masks. A girl in my class in 5th grade farted in her hypercolor shorts while at the board doing a math problem. I think about that like once a week. X-Men cartoon telling you to wear a mask during cartoon time, including Wolverine even though he'd be immune. Plot twist. Xavier and Magneto die of COVID and everyone becomes normal students and working adults. Cyclops is an aging, overweight building super. Friggin' pilot on the boiler is out again. Zap. Jean Grey has been banned from the professional poker circuit. She hasn't had the same address for more than 3 months since. She doesn't remember. But bus drivers are lonely, too. She can usually figure out when a load of old biddies are being hauled out to the local Indian casino and clean up enough for deposit on a new place and a ticket out of town before anyone comes around asking questions. Storm hosts the only show on TWC that takes viewer requests. I think there would be a D-A-R-E, like cartoon mascot to promote COVID safety protocols. Mask it or casket. Sitting here looking at my Mark Martin with a North Carolina State Trooper poster with the giant click it or ticket on comment is too perfect. No lockdowns. The speed we got the vaccine is straight up science fiction compared to what was possible in the 90s. Sequencing the genome alone would take ages. Even after less than a year everyone is about at the end of their rope. In the 90s it would have to have been stretched multiple years so they would just not do it and hope for the best. And no Zoom or working from home. I'd go one farther and say the phone system would have failed since it was designed to only handle 1% of the subscribers using it at any given time. And only one phone line per house and no mobile. I don't know, but George Carlin would have been hilarious. You know what's wrong with the FPPin world? Republicans telling you a virus is a hoax and then being first in line to get the vaccine faster than FPPin Michael Johnson. Thoughts and prayers for you. But they want the real medicine. Honestly, this might be the most Carlin posthumous quote I've ever heard. That is 100% on brand with his punchline setup. I'm pretty sure that's a quote or a spin on a quote, but I can't seem to find it undefined. Man. His bit about the rich folk sabotaging public education, wanting the poor folk to be poorly informed, rings so painfully true in the Devos era. Dude is ridiculously prescient. Prescient. Yes. It's almost as if all the things he joked about were actually happening for decades. Same could be said of Orwell and 1984. History repeats itself. And due to this, Carlin will be relevant for a long time. No remote learning. No remote working. And a vaccine that would have taken much longer to create. Probably would have resulted in many more deaths even with social media not spreading misinformation. People still had conspiracy theories. They just spread slower back then. Might have forced wealthy countries into basic income while poorer countries would have suffered even more. Vaccine would have taken years. It was questionable whether we could make one so quickly today. Fortunately we could. The time and effort required for molecular biology before PCR alone was ridiculous. I remember talking to my major professor about it at school in the early 00s. We still had radioisotopes around the lab to do sequencing the old-fashioned way. And even that was before CRISPR and other technologies. I don't think a lot of people are quite aware of how rapidly biotech has advanced in such a short period of time. It's roughly analogous to changes in computing. I wonder if that is why Gattaca came out in 1997. Considering the people wouldn't have social media to air their opinions on. Nor the modern-day streaming services. Nor Amazon. Think we'd be doing a way worse job of social distancing or whatever. The biggest difference, however, would be that most of the people who had no problem doing their job from home on a laptop in 2020 would actually still have to show up at their workplace in 1990. Same is true for students, and remote learning wouldn't have worked. The biggest difference, however, would be that most of the people who had no problem doing their job from home on a laptop in 2020 would actually still have to show up at their workplace in 1990. Same is true for students and remote learning. This is so true. There was simply no demand for any of the technologies associated with working from home. Video transmission was all analog. And digitized video compression was flipping pathetic compared to what it is today. H.264 and H.265 codecs are the result of thousands of collective patents and probably hundreds of millions in research. Much of it designed to make streaming video more efficient and more flexible on crappier internet networks. We also didn't have disk speeds, processors, anything really. The best we would have had was some novel netware adaptive speed. My friend attended remote college classes in the 90s. They mailed him VHS tapes and he watched them and then mailed them back. LOL. He still had to show up to take his exams though. My remote class in the 90s was over the radio. We tuned into the college's AM station and listened to the lecture that way. Exams were on Saturdays. Caller 9 gets tickets to Soundgarden and an automatic A. I wonder how much it would spread in the first place. It feels like there was a big jump in mobility in the last 30 years. So it's possible that it would not have spread as far in the first place. However, let's assume it did get your neighborhood. On the downside, the internet was really in widespread use. So no work or school from home. So you would have to interact with others. However, on the upside, no internet means no social media spreading false information. There were only a small amount of news outlets. And while they aren't perfect, I think they would have given better information than what some people are getting now. There would have been very little cries that it's all a hoax on network TV back then. So the general public might take it more seriously. I think Bush Sr. would also have taken it seriously. So having the president on television telling you that there is a problem does a lot to convince people that there's a problem. I think it would have spread just as far in 1990. It's just that the news about it wouldn't have spread as fast. And doctors from different areas wouldn't have been able to communicate with each other as much either. So there would have been a lot of really bad, deadly cases of pneumonia until someone put 2 and 2 together. Getting a vaccine safely to the finish line in just a year would have been impossible. 1990 would have been flipped with hoping COVID burned itself out. Because they would have been years away from getting anything workable together. Part of why the vaccine was so fast was actually because of scientists studying the similar structure of previous coronaviruses back in 2016. Without any of that research, we'd still be years away from one. We got lucky then. Sort of. Humanity stays planning for this. In one form or another. The purpose of epidemiology and public health is to prevent a pandemic from ripping through the world like the numerous ones in recorded history. It's just that the benefits of expensive research and planning ahead have to compete with the problems of today. Sadly, they also have to compete with human nature. The US was considered one of the most ready countries in the world for a pandemic, partly thanks to extensive preparation throughout government, including a pandemic playbook that had been refined over the course of multiple administrations. Trump ripped it up because Obama had touched it. Except a certain orange-haired idiot dismantled and defunded a good chunk of said mechanism a couple of years back. I would be 9 years old playing in my backyard or up in my room with stuffed animals and be super quick excited that I didn't have to go to church. Same except Nintendo and 11 years old for me. As a software engineer, rather than remoting in, I could just dial in and download the 100-200K of source code and work on it at home. Security wasn't a real issue then. DOS text-based software. And instead of trying to work on the source with maybe 1,000 other people, your whole software team that might modify your module might be fewer than 5 people unless you worked for Microsoft. Yes. Those were the days. Where the only other person that could be working on the same code is the guy sitting next to you. So you tell them you're changing common age. I have read up quite a bit on how the COVID vaccine was made. We relied a lot on research that was done starting in 2005. If this had happened in the 90s, we would not have gotten a vaccine so fast. There is a misconception that we developed the vaccine too fast. However, we actually have years of research on it. In 2005, a man started working in his lab to create a vaccine for MERS, which is another type of coronavirus. It wasn't as contagious and basically got swept under the rug, but this guy created the first RNA coronavirus vaccine. We basically just took that research and plugged in the new virus. Kind of like how you can plug in numbers to an equation that we know is true. This dude spent 10 years trying to make the first RNA vaccine, and using his research we were able to make a working vaccine before COVID-19 was considered to be a global pandemic. The rest was just perfecting it and testing it. We took no shortcuts when it came to medical trials. We just had a great head start from a dude that was interested in MERS. If COVID had happened in 1990, there is a good chance it would have taken years to come up with a vaccine instead of months. We are pretty damn lucky. This dude, who is a woman, Catalin Carrick. 100. This gets to the top of r/today I learned tomorrow. She definitely deserves to be more well known. Plus her daughter, Susan Francia, won 2 gold medals in rowing, 2 for the US. Badass family. The grunge scene probably would have never happened. You can stay 6 apart in a 2-car garage. Eddie. Nobody would know who Joe Exotic is. Wait. Joe Exotic wasn't 2019? Jesus, what a long year. Tiger King was released March 20th. Here in Belgium we first went into lockdown March 18th. Those 2 events will forever be linked in my mind. When my grandkids in 2060 ask me what the pandemic was like, I'll go, kids, let me tell you about the wondrous world of big cats in the USA. Think AIDS. Think how accurate the science was on AIDS initially. Think how people call some of that information ridiculous now and are amazed that people could have thought that way. We even have a common factor in the 2 diseases in FOSSI. Think about how that affected sex ed and supported the push for abstinence-only education. I'm baffled as to how FOSSI went from being hated on to being a hero. He was public enemy too after Reagan, and any documentary from that era is strife with people protesting with "Stop Killing Us." FOSSI. Signs. Dan Quayle would spell it wrong. COVID. You don't realize how many asshole dumbass neighbors and relatives you have cause there's no social media. Kids would have long work packets instead of online class. Good question. Terrible responses. No speep. As someone who was in his 20s in 1990. The correct answer is spotting COVID-positive people based on Gennaro hypercolor t-shirt color changes. Mike Huckabee would suggest we isolate the carriers of this plague as he did with AIDS. MacGyver would have saved us all. Well, there wouldn't be armchair doctors on Facebook spreading misinformation and conspiracies about COVID not being real. So maybe people would actually socially distance and wear masks without claiming their liberties are being infringed upon. You say that? Wow, I never knew that. I guess history does tend to repeat itself. Stupid is as stupid does. And stupid's done it before. People would just continue to live their lives normally. This is the 90s for crying out loud. This is the most likely answer. People would talk about how the flu is really bad this year and that would be about it. 1990 wasn't an election year. So definitely less politicalization. No social media and greater power in local press/news, so less misinformation. Between the two of these alone, I'd say you would have a better unified effort in local communities. Regardless of the advances we have today. We would have less noise. That would drive less competing judgments, slowing down progress and understanding. Holding the 99% or so survival rate constant. I would say it would have been better managed. Hypotheticals. I didn't even think about the election year factor. H. W. was a lot of things, but he wasn't an idiot. Just having a competent person in the White House would have done a world of difference. Without social media for people to share their insane theories and propaganda, I think everyone would have taken the pandemic much more seriously. We would not have seen the issues with wearing masks or getting the vaccination that we see now. Plus, we would have had a president that wasn't useless and a Congress that still knew how to compromise. The main issue would have been it would be almost impossible for most people to work from home. No remote learning. No streaming media to keep us entertained. It wouldn't have happened. Or at least not to the severity it has happened in 2020. There have been at least 3 huge potential pandemics in the past 20 years which have been dealt with. SARS 2006. 2009 H1N1. And Ebola 2014. I wasn't alive in 1990. Nice try. Earth was a lot less densely populated back then. Especially in China. And more importantly, the people of the world flew a lot less back then. It's not certain it would have been a problem then. But since you say if it became a pandemic, I think a higher percentage of extra deaths would have been accepted and we would have heard a lot less about it. A lot less conspiracy theory as well. And a lot less politicization of the issue, I reckon. The Republican Party would be far more responsible about it than they are today. The Gulf War/Operation Desert Storm may not have happened for one thing. Saddam would have kept Kuwait. Video rental stories would have profited significantly, since streaming services didn't exist. Schools would be beeped. Bush was a delusional president. But I think more of the country and politics were unified at that time. People trusted television and I were more patriotic/trusting of everything. Depending on which way the government decided to play the virus, nothing big. Huge disaster, it could have gone a few different ways. I think the BS beep of infringement of my rights today is so over the top. Political correctness has killed off logical thinking and both political parties are majorly corrupt. I think we are on the brink as a nation. In 1990, more people would have banded together, trusted the government, and worn the beeping masks so we could get over the speep by now. Everything now is divided and has fringe groups, so actually following science and their requests makes a bunch of winners.